Hello there, everybody. I am Maelstrom Bannibal Harca, and I am joined today by
Sailor.
ooh, and we are going to be bringing you a power ranking of what we think the best decks in the current format are.
Yep. The idea is to do this kind of frequently so that we can assess what we think is best, what we think maybe is on the rise or on the downfall.
All right. Well, the plan is to rank the top 5 decks, but before we get into those five, are there any honorable mentions you want to shout out, Sailor?
Um, I think there's like two versions, or maybe even three versions of Ember Emerald that are trying to pierce, right, and trying to understand how to attack this meta. There's like an aggro version that plays a high willpower. There's one character that is very aggro, right? And then there's this other version that's trying to be a little bit more combo with Bibbidi Babbidi Boo and Tramp and like bouncing it and putting like Stitch Surfer into play, and that tries to just discard a bunch of characters to cheat Chernabog as well. So that's kind of fun, but it's not been proving to be working all that much, or at least there's not enough people picking it. And then there's the Ember Emerald songs discard with absolutely zero set 7 cards that have just won an event. So that I think is worth mentioning, but not something really that I'm thinking of when I think about the best five. No.
And I want to pour one out for our Ruby Amethyst brethren who have basically been able to play the same deck from the start of Lorcana up until this set. I think that the addition of Bell really shuts off Flynn, and at this point, it feels like Amethyst Steel is just a better version of the Ruby Amethyst deck. So I just don't see Ruby Amethyst making a huge mark on this metagame for the first time ever.
As we're gonna see, this is like a Pete meta if I've ever seen one, and Ruby Amethyst is very easily it's very easy to see when the B prep is coming, right? So not great.
All right, is there any other deck we want to mention before we jump into the top 5?
I mean, there was some performance from Blurple, but
That's true.
maybe.
I'm skeptical, but it's a perennial favorite for sure.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's hop into the top 5 then. And this week coming in at number 5, we have Amber Steel. Now, of course, there are a number of different variants you can play here, but just in general, we're talking about decks playing Cindy 1-drop and then things like Strength and Storm. And then on one hand, you've got the more traditional Steel Song decks with Ariel and A Whole New World. And then there are other decks that are more aggressive, maybe playing locations. I know Wochuk has now pioneered Miss Bianca as a giant 4 cost 5/5 that just sort of sits in play and is difficult for steel decks to answer. And yeah, I think the deck's pretty good, but it does struggle a little bit with some of the Sapphire matchups.
I think, as always, Ember still is able to do some high rolls and outvalue some of the value type of decks, right? By just singing All New World. And then I'm not seeing the aggro version doing too well, but obviously it can still perform from time to time. Next in fourth place is Amethyst Steel. Pretty much what was left of like the set 6 metagame was the duck version being a little bit better than the rabbit version. And I think coming into Arcasia's Island, we're solidifying that with Cobra added to the list. And of course, it means that duck makes so much more sense, right? Because you can empty your old hand out and then draw back with the dock, but also discard excessive docks to the Cobra. And I I thought I didn't think it would perform as well as it did, even though like it's not like a huge performance. It still overperformed for me a little bit, and mostly because I thought it wouldn't do as well into Sapphire Steel. It still remains to be confirmed, whereas like that could still be like a maybe like a 50-50 matchup or not, but on the surface it shouldn't be that, right? Like it should be unfavored. So interesting one, and one will be on the lookout whether it can keep its spot or even go higher. What do you think?
Yeah, I see Amethyst Steel as like a classic mid-range deck. It's the kind of deck that has game into literally any matchup, especially if you get the right draw. Right now, it's definitely got a really low curve. It's trying to get underneath Ruby Sapphire, which might be his best matchup.
Yep.
Right, you play an aggressive curve and then finish them with Cobra triggers and that sort of thing. I'm personally not convinced that the deck is very good against Blue Steel, but it's been doing all right.
It's possible, I think, that they're also thriving in a meta where everybody is trying to find their footings and
Mm-hmm.
they're just pretty much the same deck than before, right?
Yep.
I think, like, I mean, obviously, Sapphire Steel is quite like a new iteration, but Ruby Sapphire specifically has like many different builds, and so there's potentially non-optimized deck that are being taken out by like just well-rounded lists from set six.
All right, and coming in at number 3, we have Emerald Steel Discard. Now, this is a deck with an extreme amount of raw potential. Obviously, shifting Diablo on turn 2 is still one of the most powerful things you can do. I do think Ursula Deceiver of All has increased in power relative to the format, in part because there are just fewer brawls running around and more, say, Let the Storm Rage on. So it's just easier to protect Ursula with your Ursula Deceiver. And yeah, I think the addition of I Find My Platinum gives it some really nice game against the item heavy decks in Blue Steel and occasionally Ruby Sapphire. Shift Pete, very, very strong into other steel decks. So overall, I think that Emerald Steel is very well positioned. It maybe struggles a little bit with Ruby Sapphire, but against the rest of the metagame, I think it has quite a bit of game.
Yeah, well, you said about the shift beat. I think it's very key to the other steel matchup, which this
Mm-hmm.
meta is full of, right? Basically, the only deck within the top five, right, that isn't steel and not playing Pete, and like the 8 song package is Ruby Sapphire. So obviously, this Pete is just gonna be very good against all those decks that are looking to sing songs and that are also looking to fight the board, right? And so this 5/5 versus 1 that is put onto a character that you want to play in these matchups anyway is a very, very, very good addition. On number 2, we have our first Sapphire decks of the top 5. It's the Ruby Sapphire control list, mostly Sisu on Ice. We've seen iteration of it played by Jonathan Williams that was more of an item list with the bells. And we haven't seen too much success from like the Manor Shark version of DKPs for now. Obviously, in the meta full of Pete, it's kind of hard to get value out of your deck full of actions. And the Sisu on Ice version is mostly a set 6 version with coil instead of ice block. It makes it so that you have to run less on inkables, and so you can play more of the Sisus and the Medusas and the big Sisus. And they are incredibly well at dealing with, well, every steel cards, right? Um, there's still the Sapphire Steel items that can go over it with workshop and all the tomatoes, right? And it just can ask Ruby Sapphire to have the answers every time. I feel like this is the deck that is a little bit unsure. We're all unsure about, and it didn't really show up in numbers this weekend. It's not that it didn't perform well; it's just that the numbers were not there.
I don't have too much to add, but I do think one big open question with regard to Ruby Sapphire in this format is whether or not we have a deck that revolves heavily around Maui Half Shark. I do think that a lot of people are packing answers for 6-drop Tamatoa and Half Shark itself, and as a result, its strength can vary a little bit, and so we're gonna have to see how the meta shakes out.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, Ruby Sapphire pretty much is looking to find its footing
Mm-hmm.
at the moment. Yeah.
All right, last but certainly not least.
Sapphire Steel, and there's 2 versions, and if we aggregate both of them, they're like 300% more represented than any other decks. And so that's Sapphire Steel, either items or more aggro. And even within the aggro versions, it's like a manner list, but it will probably either play the Alice Pluto package or Lawrence and Tamatoa, kind of like a little bit more mid range and control. And then obviously the other one is the Oswald list that's popularized on week one.
And that Oswald list is it's so funny because it's the one deck where the nut draws are just almost unbeatable by any other deck. I mean, if you get an Oswald in play and you can hit a couple triggers early on, especially if you get something like a Fishbone Quill, it just goes crazy. It's almost unbeatable. You're getting all of these free Scrooge McDucks. You're getting all these free items. You're saving a ton of ink. Uh, Oswald quests for 2 for some inexplicable reason. It's just a deck where the power level is off the charts. And, the cost is, of course, that Oswald dies to let the Storm Rage on, so it's not particularly good in the mirror, and is unfortunately also uninkable, so you can't really do anything with it. But yeah, I just think that, it's maybe a slightly higher risk, but that deck has a crazy, crazy power level ceiling.
So I feel like the item list is more flashy and new, but the Artabax version is actually stronger in the mirror and potentially the better of the two. But I do think that you don't have as many high rolls, right? Obviously, and so potentially it it it's a little bit like the Emerald Seal from the Bucky era, right? Where a bunch of players just pick
Yes.
the best deck that can do the most broken things, and just the sheer number of people playing it will make it so that the results will get there. Whereas the Sapphire Steel aggro Artabax version is less susceptible to like very high roll, but I still think that it's very good list, and it remains to be seen if both lists can still coexist in the meta. At the moment, Sapphire Steel is reigning supreme, and I think everybody just loves to be playing like a new deck, right, with new powerful tools.
Absolutely.
As long as you have the cards, right? Because obviously, if everybody wants to do it, then the price go up.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. These have been our top 5 decks for the current spot in the metagame, and we'll see if they shift around. But we'll catch you next time.
Bye.